I'm Elizabeth Ray.
I'm Alistair Stevens.
And Tom Cruise is Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg in Valkyrie.
Sometimes I enter this show with a bit of framing or some pedantic technical definitions or with a little story that takes us into the development of the film, but this week we have no time because we're talking about Tom Cruise's last real play for traditional Oscar validation. We're talking about the second of the two films he made for the resurrected United Artists and parenthetically the film that killed United Artists. We're talking about the first time that he works with the man who will become his writer and director of choice, Christopher McQuarrie. We're talking about the alleged sex criminal and confirmed bad director, Bryan Singer, and we're talking about, the history of World War II and the plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. So no time, trailer game, let's go. When the shadow of World War II fell across Europe, many chose not to hide in fear, but to stand up, to follow the words of John Stuart Mill. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. Though not as centralized or as heralded as the French, Norwegian, Italian resistances, the German resistance movement waged a domestic war against the depredations of Hitler's Reich. Over 800,000 German citizens were arrested by the Gestapo for acting against the interests of the regime. More than 50,000 were put to death. This is one such story of resistance. Valkyrie. So not a fun trailer game.
That's okay. Not everything can be a joke.
Not a lot of laughs to be. Not a lot of goofs here in Valkyrie. In what is, I think, a surprisingly good film.
I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
I didn't have very high expectations for it just because I know that we're like in the nadir of the Tom Cruise run, or this his heaviest levels of toxicity, you would say.
Certainly his heaviest levels of toxicity. I think it is entirely possible to make an argument that Tom Cruise's personal reputation is what sinks Valkyrie at the box
really
office.
a shame.
And even then, it's not a disaster. It's not a huge loss. It is just somewhat unregarded because of Cruise himself. And I think that had this come out 5 years earlier or 5 years later, I think it would have been a different story. I think this would be recognized as one of the most interesting films of his career, certainly one of the most ambitious, and unlike really anything else that he's done.
It's a very competent film,
right? A thoroughly competent grown-up film.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone involved, perhaps surprisingly, everyone involved seems to have just turned in some solid work, which yields us a film that probably isn't ever going to be heralded as one of the lost gems of Tom Cruise's filmography, but is at least better than I think its common reputation would have you believe.
I feel like its reputation is that it's just forgotten.
Mostly, yeah.
Right? I don't think anybody really talks about it, except when the internet blew up about whether or not Tom Cruise's butt was padded for this film. Do you remember this?
I do remember that. Yes, long after the film came out.
Long after.
It had just been rediscovered by Twitter, I guess. Yeah, you know more about that than I do. Do you want to talk us through that?
Barely. I just remember everybody being like, no one's butt is this round. He was obviously wearing a prosthetic butt. And he was like, no, that's my real butt. And then apparently not even that long ago, they had his personal trainer weigh in on whether or not this is actually his butt. And
in an interview with, I want to say, GQ.
Or it was or Men's Health or something real. It's very, very strange.
What a weird day for both of those people. For the person asking the question and for the person answering the question. Right. That is somehow your job for that 5 minutes. That is your professional engagement. It's a strange world we live in. And I'll say, having just watched the film again, his butt doesn't really stand out that much.
No. The moment, though, that they're talking about, I did notice because I was like, wait, is this the butt padding question? It must be, because I know I've seen this particular, this butt before
You've
on the
seen
internet.
this butt before. A tagline for this entire podcast. Let's get into it and talk a little, I guess, about the origins of this film in particular. In 2002, writer-director Christopher McQuarrie is vacationing in Berlin, Germany. His career is in a pretty good place at this point because he'd just written the huge hit, The Usual Suspects, in 1995, which was directed by his longtime collaborator, his high school friend, and the director of Valkyrie, Bryan Singer. We'll talk about him in a minute. McQuarrie had done some uncredited rewriting on Batman and Robin in 1997, on Singer's X-Men in the year 2000, and then he went off to direct his own movie, The Way of the Gun, starring Ryan Felipe, Benicio del Toro, and Juliette Lewis.
Wow.
That is a sack full of crazy in that cast, I'll tell you that. The film is a modest success, and McQuarrie's ready to start thinking about what comes next. During a tour of the city, and this is a quote from McQuarrie himself from an interview with First Showing, quote, "The last place my tour guide took me was the Bendler Block, which is where a lot of the events of July 20th took place and where the whole story came to an end. And the Bendler Block is now a monument to the German resistance. And as he was telling me about this, I knew a little bit about it. I knew something about a one-eyed colonel, and I knew about a bomb under a table, and I'd always been fascinated with that kind of story, the behind-the-scenes story set within the Third Reich." End quote. This story that he's referring to is the story of Wehrmacht Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. McQuarrie writes the script with Nathan Alexander, who had been his personal assistant on The Way of the Gun. He then puts it in a drawer, believing that it is very unlikely that he could ever get such an ambitious and specific movie greenlit from a studio. In 2004, when McQuarrie's working with Singer on a completely unnecessary and thankfully long-forgotten reboot of the 70s sci-fi classic Logan's Run, he casually mentions the Valkyrie script, and Singer asks to see it. So this is the point at which we have to talk about Bryan Singer, and I guess, content warnings apply for just some really nasty shit. This guy
Gross behavior.
is just unpleasant. He grows up in New Jersey. He attends West Windsor Plainsboro High School with McQuarrie. Then he attends the School of Visual Arts in New York and the USC School of Cinematic Arts in LA. He makes a movie called Public Access in 1993 from a script by McQuarrie and Michael Fite Douglas. It costs $250,000. It's shot in 18 days, and it is the co-winner of the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance in 1993. This kind of sets Singer's reputation as something of a wunderkind, something of an enfant terrible as he's coming up through the industry. Despite that, it doesn't get a distributor and has never been widely released. It does, though, get Singer enough attention that he secures funding for his breakout feature, the aforementioned The Usual Suspects. It shoots for $6 million and makes $67 million at the box office, as well as winning Academy Awards for McQuarrie, very early in his career, and for Kevin Spacey as Best Supporting Actor. It's odd that you can mention Kevin Spacey and he's not going to be the most unpleasant person you talk about in the span of this podcast.
Yep.
In 1998, Singer directs the adaptation of Stephen King's Apt Pupil, starring Sir Ian McKellen. This time, a budget of $14 million leads to a box office take of almost $9 million. The film is fairly well regarded critically, but it doesn't find much of an audience, and this is the beginning of Singer's extremely questionable legal entanglements, because the production is sued by the families of at least 5 teenaged actors, the youngest was 14, who accuse Singer of telling them to strip and shoot a nude shower scene. The production, including Singer, settles out of court. In 2019, after a year-long investigation by The Atlantic, further details of Singer's behavior on the set of Apt Pupil are released, including allegations of sexual assault by the then 13-year-old Victor Valdivinos.
God.
According to The Atlantic report, Valdivinos was not alone. At least 4 more boys came forward alleging sexual assault on the set of Apt Pupil. And in the years since, Singer has been accused in civil lawsuits of sexual assault of a minor and rape 3 times. Each has been settled out of court. Singer also has a well-established history of just not working when he's supposed to be on set. In 2020, The Hollywood Reporter published a story detailing Singer's actions on the set of the 2000 movie X-Men. Singer was 34, was being heralded as a serious talent because of The Usual Suspects, and was one of the most prominent out bisexual men in Hollywood, but was also getting a reputation as someone who was pretty fundamentally disinterested in, making films. He would show up late to meetings, oftentimes bringing a new young male friend with him to sit in on production meetings or writer meetings. Singer's then boyfriend is given a minor role in the film. Several young men, some of whom are minors, claim that Singer promised them X-Men auditions in exchange for sex and for drugs. And I'll note here, with links to the Atlantic piece and the Hollywood Reporter piece in the show notes, that Singer is not acting alone through this period. He is surrounded by producers who are being accused of similar things at the same time. By the time he's shooting the X-Men sequel, his behavior has deteriorated still further. He gets in a public on-set fight with producer Tom DeSanto. DeSanto wants to stop production because Singer is visibly high, and when Singer overrules him, a messed up stunt causes Hugh Jackman to be injured, to bleed on set. The studio closed ranks around Singer, and DeSanto was going to be fired before the core cast of the movie, dressed in their X-Men costumes, go to Singer's trailer and demand that DeSanto remain on set.
Wow.
But here's the problem.
Uh-huh.
X-Men 1 was a big hit. X-Men 2 is a bigger hit.
Yeah.
And Singer's behavior only gets worse. He is repeatedly absent from set while shooting the sequels. He is accused again and again of sexual misconduct, sexual assault. Olivia Munn, who appears as Psylocke in X-Men Apocalypse, a genuinely terrible film, said, quote, "He was gone for about 10 days is my recollection. And he said, continue, keep filming. And he texted the actors, hey guys, I'm busy right now. Just go ahead and start filming without me. And we'd be like, okay. And I never thought any of it was normal, but I didn't realize that other people also thought it wasn't normal." End quote. The end of Singer's career, we can only hope, comes on the set of Bohemian Rhapsody in 2017 when he is unceremoniously fired after not showing up for extended periods of time, leaving cinematographer Newton Thomas Siegel, who is also the cinematographer on Valkyrie, to direct huge chunks of the movie uncredited. With 2 weeks of production left, Fox steps in and fires Singer, terminating their deal with his production company. And that's the end of the story. He has apparently moved to Israel, where he talks a lot about self-funding a documentary to prove his innocence, but has yet to do a damn thing.
Wow.
Just a famous asshole. Just a famous, terrible person in the industry.
Yikes. Wow. Okay.
And one of the least impactful but most frustrating things about that is that if you go and look on IMDb right now, Bryan Singer is the credited director of Bohemian Rhapsody, a film that for some reason did get a certain amount of attention because the DGA rules are so ass backwards when it comes to this kind of stuff. The DGA rules are put in place to protect directors early in the development of the industry, but now perhaps it's well past time that we reappraise how those rules work and certainly how they're applied in cases like this. Do you have a familiarity with Bryan Singer coming into this?
Almost none at all. No. I was watching an actors roundtable with all women talking about like the changes happening in the industry to put more women behind the cameras, more women on crews, more women directing. And Jennifer Lawrence was talking about working with him. And of course, she's a very frank person. And it just came up because one of the women had said how frustrating it was that there's this belief that women are too emotional to lead or direct. And Jennifer Lawrence just said, well, I've worked with Bryan Singer, and everybody laughed. Yeah. So that was just kind of when I realized that he was a running joke, but before I knew that he was also such a creep.
And that's the thing, is that he had been a running joke for 10 years before anyone was really paying attention to the allegations against him. It was well known for years and years and years that you hire Bryan Singer to direct your film, and that means that your first AD is going to be directing a bunch of stuff, and your cinematographer is going to be directing a bunch of stuff, and the actors are going to kind of be finding their own way. And I think that when you look at his films, you can see the triumph of the ensemble cast. I think from The Usual Suspects forward, you can see a bunch of very good actors really delivering performances kind of in defiance of the film as a whole. And I think that that is true of Valkyrie also. I think that this film is almost completely devoid of authorial fingerprint, right? It really doesn't feel like it was made by anyone.
Yes. I have fewer notes on this movie than by far. I don't have my notebook open because I don't need to look at them, because there's just nothing that sings about it. Like, it's good and competent. As I said, it's a good movie, but there's just nothing that ever stood out. There wasn't a moment that I thought, oh, this is a choice that was made. It just all was, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this guy said this, and they all did it beautifully, but that's all.
The thing, I think, is that if you didn't know that this was a big budget, big screen movie, you would assume that this had been made by HBO, that this was like...
That's a really good point.
Classic, you know, well-funded but not excessively funded prestige television.
I think that's absolutely
It feels
correct.
very much like that.
Yeah.
Back to the movie, though. It is McQuarrie's idea that Singer take Valkyrie to United Artists, which, as we discussed in our Lions for Lambs episode, had recently been brought back to life and handed to Cruise and Paula Wagner. Singer does so, and Cruise agrees first to produce the movie, and then, having seen a picture of Staffenberg and noting a physical similarity, this is overstated in the press, right? You can go and look at promotional material for Valkyrie, which will claim that the real Klaus von Staffenberg looked exactly like Tom Cruise. And to the sense that they are both, you know, human males, that's kind of there is a bone structure similarity, I suppose, but you would not be struck by a picture of either man and confuse him for the other. But it's enough to get Cruise interested, so he agrees to play the lead. And Singer realizes that the movie is now a much bigger deal than he thought. Overnight, the budget jumps from $20 million to $60 million, and it will eventually top out at $85 million.
Yeah, I mean, anything that you set in a time period that's not modern is going to cost you a lot more. And it does look perfect.
Is true. And there is a large cast, right? We're dealing with a lot of characters and a lot of ensemble players too, a lot of extras too.
Big actors and paychecks too.
Absolutely. But it doesn't look that good. Is the thing.
No,
It
it's
doesn't look
true.
extraordinary.
I think you really nailed it when you said it looks like prestige television. It really does.
Except the sole exception to that is the CGI work to do the limb removal and the finger removal on Cruise himself, which is
Yeah.
seamless.
It is really good.
And that's expensive.
Yeah,
Doing
that's
that
a
kind
good
of thing
point.
is
Yeah.
is very hard to do on a budget, and they really threw money at it, and it looks, I genuinely think, flawless. I think it looks
Yeah.
amazing.
No,
Yeah.
it does. And the opening sequence with all the explosions also looked expensive.
Yeah, that's true too. Just to tie a bow on this production story, by the way, I mentioned that this will be the last film that Cruise and Wagner produce under the United Artists label. Before the release of Valkyrie, it's announced that Wagner is leaving UA and leaving her long-term partnership with Tom Cruise to produce films independently. UA then completes its commitment to produce the 2009 remake of Fame, and the perfect end, really, to a century of prestige cinema, Hot Tub Time Machine.
Which I watched recently.
Which is not a bad film.
Sure.
There's a cherry on top of this cherry, even, because after a shuffle of MGM's properties a couple years later, UA gets kind of semi-resurrected. It's already attached to Eon Productions, so UA appears in the credits for Skyfall in 2012.
Oh, cool.
Red Dawn also in 2012. And then, when it is finally killed for dead, this time we mean it, the last film that it produces is Hot Tub Time Machine 2.
What a legacy.
Just staked through the heart with
Wow.
a fine and mediocre film followed by a really shitty film.
Yeah, I didn't see the second one.
Yeah. This marks the end, by the way, of the formal working relationship between Cruise and Wagner, though she will return to executively produce the Jack Reacher movies, and by all accounts, they are still very fond of each other in the years to come. She's continued to find critical and commercial success and is still working hard despite being richer than the 5 greatest kings of Europe. She's incredibly successful.
her.
Perhaps most interestingly, she turned her attention to theatre, producing a number of shows, including a musical version of Pretty Woman, which opened in London the
Weird,
month
but all
before
right.
the pandemic shut everything down.
Oh.
That musical is apparently coming to Broadway next year. It's
Really?
apparently pretty good. The notices in the first run were apparently very positive. So
Okay.
I can't quite imagine how that
So
works. But,
odd, but all right, yeah.
She also produced a Broadway revival of The Heiress in 2012, starring Jessica Chastain, David
Cool.
Strathairn, and Dan Stevens.
Damn. All
That's
right.
a hell of a
That's
cast.
a hell of a cast.
That's
yeah.
a hell of a cast.
Yeah.
And Dan
Would
Stevens
see.
is there, so that's nice.
I was wondering, Dan Stevens is the odd man out there.
Right. Valkyrie shoots almost entirely in Berlin, which isn't uncomplicated because of Germany's official position on Scientology. Namely, that Scientology is officially a dangerous cult, according to the German government.
Ooh.
A spokesman for the German Defense Ministry said, quote,
Interesting.
"A sincere and respectable depiction of the events of the 20th of July and of Stauffenberg is therefore very much in Germany's interest. Tom Cruise, with his Scientology background, is not the right person for this."
Wow.
End quote. A spokesman for the German Protestant Church compared the film to the 1936 Berlin Olympics, explicitly comparing Scientologists to Nazis and Tom Cruise to Joseph Goebbels.
Damn.
Right?
Oh, man.
Kenneth Branagh said, around the time of the film's release, that the response had been triggered by a misunderstanding of the film's intent, and that after reading the script, the person who had triggered the complaint in the first place contacted the production to apologize and to acknowledge that the film was more respectful and better
Yeah.
intended than anyone thought.
Which it is.
And certainly, I don't think you can look at anything in this film and see Scientology propaganda.
Absolutely not.
I don't
Not that I
think
would
there's an
know
aspect.
it when I saw it, but yeah, it doesn't seem that way.
Speaking of Kenneth Branagh, normally this is where I do capsule biographies of our prominent actors, but we
Yeah.
would be here for 3 hours straight, so we're just going to
Be
run
a good
down
3
the
hours,
list.
though. I just love him.
This cast is
The
outstanding.
cast is, yeah. That was most of my notes, was me just writing down, name of this actor, exclamation
Right?
point. Name of this actor, exclamation point. Yeah.
So let's just run down the list a little bit. I think Branagh is absolutely fantastic.
Top of his game.
It is
so good.
so unfortunate that because of history, he disappears basically at the end of the
Yeah.
first act and then only shows up at the end to commit suicide in the least pleasant way I can imagine,
Yeah.
holding a grenade to your own neck. That is
Horrible.
wild.
Yeah.
He's just great though, right? This is
Yeah,
Branagh
he's
at
terrific.
his like pudgy character actor best. I think I love Branagh in this period.
Yeah.
He's a little bit heavier. He's not seeking the spotlight quite so much. It doesn't
Right.
feel quite as self-aggrandizing as some of his later work will
Yes,
feel.
much more generous actor.
Yeah, I really love Branagh in this position in his career. I actually love what Christopher Nolan is doing with him over the last few movies, using him as such an interesting character actor and a
Yeah,
foil against
yeah, that's
type
right.
almost. He's just great. This is one of my favorite performances by British actor Bill Nighy. I don't always love Bill
I
Nye.
know that you don't. I'm glad that you liked him in this. I thought he was wonderful.
Because I think that we're playing into his great strength as someone who is fundamentally not trustworthy.
Yeah.
I think it really, really works. He speaks to you in this film?
In that sequence where he loses his resolve and you can see his fear for himself and his own safety take over, and he really throws Staffenberg under the bus, and you see Mertz just be so angry with him and take matters into his own hands, I thought that the performance there was really striking. And and somewhat you go from like liking this character and being on side to just hating this guy,
to being so frustrated. And it is, of course, a serious, I think, historical contention that if the bomb had been successful and Hitler had in fact been killed that day, that the revolution, that the rebellion, the uprising would not have been effective because of that 3-hour window.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing to face.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Ooh, yeah.
Let's talk a little about maybe my favorite performance in the entire film, which is Terrence Stamp as General Beck, who is so incredibly good.
Completely agree. When I first saw him, I identified him and wrote down Malcolm McDowell, and I was like, "Wait, that's not who that is."
No,
but you see it, right?
Yeah.
So then I had to look him up, and I was like, "Oh, Terrence Stamp, yes." But he's wonderful. He has such a face.
Incredibly strong, and all of that gravitas, all of that natural authority that he wields, but a great sensitivity in his delivery too. I think he really is. Yeah, every time he's on screen, I want to look at him. I want to be paying attention to what he's saying. I just think it's terrific. We can talk about Tom Wilkinson giving...
Who I always love.
A less sweaty performance. Tom Wilkinson is kind of at an interesting point in his career as Valkyrie's coming out, because he has just played Carmine Falcone in Batman Begins.
So
he's just moving into this really high-profile part of his career.
Sure.
And this is a really interesting performance that I kind of wish he just had a little... Again, we have to blame history here, right? I wish he had a little more to do. But his final turn of trying to demonstrate his loyalty to the Reich, his loyalty to the Fuhrer, by executing these people out of hand so that they cannot communicate his own dubious loyalty, it's very strong. That's why you hire Tom Wilkinson, is to be exactly that sweaty and exactly that nasty and duplicitous. I think it's a really lovely moment. Can we talk about Nina Schenk, Gräfin von Staffenberg, Staffenberg's wife? I mean... This is fantastic. This is just such a brilliant... This is the most sexual chemistry that we have seen with Tom Cruise, definitely since Zellweger, and maybe ever. I know they only have a few moments on screen. When she kisses him, it is like Tom Cruise knows how to kiss again. And it's been, 20 years since that's been true. It's remarkable. And of course, we absolutely love Carice van Houten.
What do we know her from? She's so beautiful.
Oh, sweetheart.
Remind me.
She is Melisandre.
Oh my God, she is. Wow, I see it now so clearly.
She is the Red Priestess, yes.
Oh my God,
one of the
absolute
delight. High points of Game of Thrones. Just a performance that
agree.
wall to wall is mesmerizing.
Absolutely.
And here she's
has my favorite moment, which I think you still haven't seen because it's in the 8th season.
I still have not seen the 8th season of Game of Thrones.
You know what? And no one can blame you for that. It's okay.
Hey, I want to be very clear. This is not, I'm not taking any kind of political stand.
Sure.
I just haven't. I know what people say about it. I just haven't got around to it. I found watching the 7th season so laborious that I lacked momentum coming in. And now it's been so long that I have to go back and watch the whole damn thing again. And I'll tell you this, I don't need to watch the first 2 seasons of Game of Thrones again, except that I do if I'm ever going to watch the last season. So it's a complicated process.
It is. It's true. Yeah, that's a big commitment, I guess.
We are where we are. Let's talk a little about Eddie Izzard, the fantastic Eddie Izzard. Who,
so delighted to see.
Yes, I love Eddie Izzard. A note here on Izzard's identity. Eddie Izzard, as was, now also uses the name Susie, but also uses the name Eddie. Either are fine, but does prefer she, her pronouns.
Okay.
That's where we are right now as of 2024.
All right.
In the story of Eddie Izzard. I love her. I mean, I'm such a huge fan of Izzard all the way back. You know, the mid-90s were defined for me by Izzard's stand-up comedy. I just think it's so terrific. And I really love the move that she takes into acting in around this period, right? It's really from, 2000 to 2010. I feel like that's where she crops up in these really interesting roles and really interesting films, always a little unexpected, always a welcome presence.
Yeah.
I think that maybe the demands of this role and really the brevity of the role, I think that the fact that she has to communicate so much in such limited time maybe exceeds her acting skill a little at this point in her career. but
Possibly.
still so welcome.
Yeah.
And got that voice, right? What a unique and brilliant voice.
Very much so.
Absolutely adore it.
Yeah.
There are so many other people in this film. Does anyone else stand out to you? We should probably talk about David Bamber, who plays Adolf Hitler, who gives for me the least convincing performance in the film. I think it is just a little cliched.
Yeah.
Really leaning into the impersonation rather than giving a more authentic performance, it
Would
seems
agree.
to me.
Absolutely.
Is
Yeah.
there
There's also
else?
not a lot there.
There's really not. And we're a long way down before we hit him. Oh, we should talk, of course, about the odious Heinz Brandt, played by Tom Hollander.
Yeah.
Who is just the worst.
He is the worst. I love that. I always think of him now as Mr. Collins from the 2005 Pride and Prejudice. Yeah.
Just the Weaseliest dude.
Yes.
I guess by all accounts is pleasant enough in real life, but I don't know that I could, take him seriously as a human being. Yeah. Oh, and we should also note, of course, in this opening sequence, we should talk about Bernard Hill, who sadly passed away 3 weeks ago as of this recording, who we know as the captain of the Titanic, as we know as Theoden King.
Oh, Theoden King, that's right.
So weird, because I didn't know that he was in the beginning of this film.
Yeah.
And it was so strange to see him with just all of that sincerity, all of that authority, of course, but also the ability to listen and to judge and to reflect. It is a brilliant performance right at the beginning of this film. And really sad to see him be so goddamn good again this very familiar mode of his, but in a brand new role. And just a sad loss to us all, I think.
Absolutely. Who is the young kid who plays Staffenberg's, his assistant?
His adjutant.
His adjutant. Yeah,
his name is Jamie Parker. The role is Werner von Haften.
Mm-hmm.
He is best known, I am told, for appearing in Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. He's a stage actor. Yeah.
Well, I thought he was wonderful.
He's appeared in The History Boys. And Valkyrie is really maybe his highest profile film role.
Oh, okay.
But he's really nice. And
he did so much with his face because he didn't have very many lines.
Yes.
So he communicated so much with his facial expressions alone.
And a really great and immediate intimacy with Cruz, who I guess is the last person that we should really talk about in this cast.
Sure.
He's terrific.
He is terrific. He is very American. I find it difficult.
It is an interesting choice. Yes. And his accent does kind of flow in and out. He is clearly adopting something of a more English affect when he is talking to Bernard Hill right at the beginning. When he's talking to Kenneth Branagh, for some reason specifically, his Americanness falls away a little bit. He becomes a little more mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
But I kind of admire this commitment to, have your voice. Nobody has to do an accent. Nobody has to pretend to be anything that they're not. Just do your voice. And we understand through the mechanism at the beginning of the film that all of this is being translated, that all of this is just magically actually in very authentic German. We get to do the title chirons first, which appear in German and are then resolved down into English in a really interesting way. And then, of course, Cruz's opening voiceover, which sounds to me like he has a real handle on a German accent.
Really? Okay. I was going to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know that you lived in Germany, so you can really speak to that much more than I could.
Yeah, it sounded authentic enough to me, but
That's wonderful. Okay.
But then you're right, the Americanness of it. And because he is such a standout as basically the sole American in this entire cast, along with a lot of heavy hitter British theatrical actors.
Absolutely.
It made you wish that he had done something a little more neutral, perhaps. Maybe
or a little more classical is, I guess, what I want. Yeah.
Also that.
I want something more mid-Atlantic. Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So that's our cast. The film shoots from July to October of 2007, and then they add reshoots in June of 2008, ahead of release in December of 2008. And that long production, I think, explains why we get this excellent CGI, because CGI can be good, fast, or cheap. Pick two. And I think that's why that works so well. The movie's released on, as I say, December 25th, 2008. And the top 4 at the box office that weekend are all new releases. Marley and Me comes in at number 1.
Oh, sure. That's the dog one
with
Owen Wilson. Yeah.
And is that Jennifer Aniston?
I don't remember
who
know.
Who's the female lead.
It was probably a Jennifer.
The Adam Sandler fantasy comedy Bedtime Stories comes in at number 2. David Fincher's The Curious Case of Benjamin Button opens at number 3 at the box office, and Valkyrie opens at 4. And despite critical predictions, it's really holding its own. What's wild is how short all the runs in the top 10 are. The first movie at the box office that has been around for more than 3 weeks is Twilight, at number 12,
Whoa.
enjoying its 6th week in theaters, right above Slumdog Millionaire at 13,
Oh, sure.
which has been around for 7 weeks.
That's so
all of
weird.
these
I would
films,
never have put those
brand
films
new.
as coming out at the same time. For
A
some
week
reason,
apart.
Slumdog feels like 2002 to me.
Isn't that crazy?
That is wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, we should talk about the influence of Cruise. We mentioned his relative, lack of popularity, his controversial status in Germany at the time. But this is extended across really the whole world. He is a mocked figure during this period. He has yet to even begin to rehabilitate himself, which he's going to do, well, in 2 movies' time, because first we're going to take a swing at rehabilitation with Night and Day next week. But
I just don't even know what to think about that one. Yeah, we'll see.
That is going to be, I think, a fun discussion.
I'm so glad.
That's
good.
Basically, as far as we can go. The cast on that is what we'll talk about that right at the end of the podcast when we trail next week's show. But yeah, he's going to try and rehabilitate himself in Night and Day, and then he's just going to go back to the Mission Impossible well. And against all odds, that's actually going to work. He's actually going to begin to reestablish himself as this very different kind of Tom Cruise. But at this point, no one is here for it. No one is here for him actually trying to deliver a performance that
shame.
To some extent goes against his movie star status.
Yeah.
No one is here for him taking a historical drama and trying to present something with a bit of gravitas. And certainly no one is here for him blatantly trying to get an Oscar. This is clearly the most egregious Oscar play, well, the most egregious since Lions for Lambs, which was also, very recent and very stark, that he wants the recognition of the Academy. This is the last time he's even going to try. There is no chance from here on out that he is going to win an Oscar on the strength of his performance alone, right? He'll probably inevitably get something for some blockbuster movie. We'll do a 3rd Top Gun sequel, and the Academy will give him something just for sticking around that long. That's how the Academy operates. But right now, in 2008, this is clearly a play for some kind of recognition, some kind of credibility, and could, if he had won, I think, or even been nominated, I think it could have encouraged a pivot to a different kind of Cruise, to character actor Cruise, as we go forward. Lions for Lambs, Tropic Thunder, and then this film could have been the beginning of an entire second act in his career. And instead, the second act of his career is a reset to the first act of his career, and he just keeps playing the hits, which I'm not going to complain about because he's pretty solid.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a look at the Best Actor category at the 81st Academy Awards.
Yeah,
of course,
that's fascinating.
we talked about this because this movie comes out 5 months after Tropic Thunder. So we discussed this Academy Awards a little in last week's show.
Yeah, that's right.
This is where
RDJ gets nominated.
RDJ gets nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but of course does not win because Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight is untouchable.
Yeah.
Partly because of the quality of the performance, but partly because of personal circumstances too. The Best Actor category, though, is really interesting. Sean Penn wins for Milk, which is, I think, not a very good performance. Richard Jenkins is nominated for The Visitor. Frank Langella is nominated for Frost Nixon. Also, I think, not a very good performance. Brad Pitt is nominated for The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which, get the hell out of here. What are you talking about? That performance is so bad. I am a huge Fincher fan, and I love when people take crazy swings, but that is such a Brad Pitt warmed to like 3 out of 10 on his personal charisma scale. It doesn't. I
don't like the movie.
I struggle to even gesture toward the nomination, and certainly not to consider him for a win. And then the
shocking.
other nominated actor is Mickey Rourke for The Wrestler, which also, get the hell out of here. Get the hell out of here in a different direction to Brad Pitt. Get the hell out of here. You guys can take different exits. But what are we thinking?
That's so weird.
So I look at that list and I think, Tom Cruise should have been nominated for Valkyrie.
Maybe so.
I'm going to put that up there. I think that is absolutely true. I think, you can look at the other nominees for Best Picture in particular. Slumdog, of course, wins this year. And
Slumdog was really special.
Benjamin Button, Frost Nixon, Milk, and The Reader are all nominated for Best Picture.
I admit I haven't seen many of those.
Yeah. It's a weird time in cinema history, honestly. But yeah. It's a weird category. And looking at those names, yeah, I think Cruise should have been nominated.
How strange.
Do you agree with that, or are you less enamored of his performance?
It is a good performance. I think just like the script itself, like the film, doesn't feel like Academy Award material to me. Like accepting the very final scene with all the executions, it's really not as dramatic as you would expect. You know what I mean? It's suspenseful.
It is more naturalistic, certainly.
Naturalistic,
we don't really employ any heightened cinematic language because the film is primarily being shot by the cinematographer. But I think that, it's interesting to consider how this type of film, just this, you're right, very competent, very adult film, sits in a Hollywood of 2008. I think that it's an interesting balancing act, right? Particularly when you're up against very splashy things like Benjamin Button, very high profile swings for the fences like Milk, or things like Tropic Thunder that are giving something much more provocative. Valkyrie is a very quiet film for all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
almost like a documentary.
Last night, I finally got you to sit down and watch Broadcast News.
I did, yeah.
Welcome to our podcast within a podcast, the Broadcast News Minute. What did you think of Broadcast News?
It took me a second. I think I said to you, they really don't make them like this anymore, and for good and for bad. James L. Brooks is not somebody who I recognize like their cadence and their work all of the time as quickly, certainly as you do.
I have an enormous a love-hate affection. What is a love-hate love? I adore how much I love some of James L. Brooks' very written lines. And Broadcast News is, of course, replete with them.
Yeah. But the performances were out of this world. Holly Hunter, William Hurt, Albert Brooks, all just knocked it completely out of the park.
Nicholson just, I think,
too.
giving a really great, sleazy, poised performance is just lovely. Protsky, I think, is fantastic. Yeah, the extended cast is really, really good. It's a stone cold classic. And the thing that connects it to Valkyrie for me is, of course, this idea of what if films were for grown-ups?
Yeah.
What if films just told stories? What if films just did a thing? And it was 90 minutes or 2 hours, and then it was over, and didn't have to kick off a franchise or have a 40-minute third act fight scene, you know?
Absolutely.
Broadcast News in particular is so quiet in its resolution, right? The end of the story
Almost
is just
no resolution.
Yeah, this was never going to work out.
Yeah,
This
and then
was
we all
never
went
gonna
our
be what you
separate
wanted.
ways because sometimes when you're grown up, that's
when you're
how
a grown
things
up,
work.
you suck it up, you go yourself, and then there's always going to be this bittersweet thing, you know? It's so lovely how watching it again this time and being conscious, because I was just thinking through the whole film of where it ends, kind of seeing the film through your eyes, and kind of because you're primed to expect this love. Spoilers for Broadcast News, I guess, you guys.
Yeah.
But Albert Brooks is throwing ahead to this inevitability the whole time.
Absolutely.
And it's really, really lovely.
Yeah,
it's just such a great movie. And Holly Hunter,
Hunter, chemistry with every single person on that set, to the point you're just like, is she just sleeping with everybody? Is she? I'm not sure.
There's
like,
the moment,
props to her.
There's the moment when Jennifer pulls her aside.
Yes.
And it's like, you two are going to make out. This is every single thing in both of your body languages is telling me that this is going to be a kissing book.
Yep.
And it's not, which I'm going to say is a little disappointing, but just outlandish how good that film is. Anyway, let's get into the beat by beat for Valkyrie, shall we? Before we get to that, I suppose that we should talk about its historical accuracy. We should kind of footnote this discussion with its historical accuracy, which is to say that it is pretty damn accurate. Peter Hoffmann, who is the professor of history at McGill and is a primary authority on the German resistance, he's one of the best respected academics in this field in the entire world, works as a consultant on this film and tries to keep it very accurate, very realistic. There are some tweaks, there are some elisions. A couple of characters are cut in the name of efficiency, but
that makes sense.
Those roles are handed off to similar actors in the space, at least. There are a few changes, and it is fair to say, I think, that the drama is somewhat increased toward the end of the film. The plot did not come as close to succeeding as the film suggests, but within the same ballpark, for sure. The main difference that they make is that the first assassination attempt on July 11th, the failed attempt, doesn't happen at the Wolf's Lair, but rather at Berchtesgaden. McQuarrie changes it so the audience can see the inside of the Wolf's Lair, and we can get an early introduction to the layers of security, to the process, to what this building feels like. We get that early introduction so that the repeated attempt, we don't have to do so much hand-holding right there at the end of the third act when we're really leaning into the process of the story. The other changes are related to backstory and underlying motivations, right? Von Stauffenberg's opposition to Hitler is real, but he was also a marked anti-Semite. He didn't believe in genocide as a solution. This was where he really differed from the Fuhrer, but he didn't believe in genocide as a solution, but did believe in the deportation of the Jewish people from Germany and its holdings. So a complicated figure, certainly, but the resistance is true. His desire to preserve the spirit of Germany is true. His ending line, the long live sacred Germany, long live holy Germany in some translations, the word is a little soft in terms of its translation. That is a very controversial attribution to him at that point. Some people will tell you absolutely that is what he said when he was executed, and some people will say absolutely not, he didn't say a thing.
Wow,
there's just a difference
so
in the eyewitness reports. But that difference persists to this day. People still talk about whether or not he said anything right at the moment of his execution. So, with all that said, let's get into our film. We begin with von Stauffenberg in the North African desert. We get this, as I said, shift from German to English. How does that work for you? Is that a nice piece of cinematic rhetoric there?
Yeah.
Or does it feel a little forced?
I think maybe both. Like I enjoyed it most with the title cards at the beginning. I liked that, the fade from the German into the English. I then didn't feel that I needed it from Cruz, like from my first character, but it didn't throw me out either.
The only thing that threw me out is that he's narrating what he's writing in his little journal, right? And as he transitions in the voiceover to English, I really wanted the written words on the page to also translate into
but they
English.
stayed German.
But they stayed German, which felt a little...
It was just a little odd. Yeah, but I think it was just really trying to make sure that we knew that we are with... this is all in German, that these are all Germans, especially when you have somebody like Tom Cruise, who you really expect to be, probably a spy, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's a powerful statement of principle too, to look at like the content of that opening monologue. It's a really powerful statement about what Stauffenberg holds to be true and what he holds to be important. This principle is going to run through the whole film, and I find Cruise's performance, I mean, he is an actor who can deliver on principle. He can be one thing very intensely.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And that is, I think, absolutely, if there's a criticism of this performance, it's that he's not really very varied at all.
Yeah.
We get those moments right at the end, right when things are getting very frayed and are really falling apart, when he is reaching out via his secretary, reaching out to his wife and children, trying to find out if they survive. They did, by the way.
Yes.
Nina Stauffenberg doesn't die until 2006.
Yes.
Which feels wild.
It really is astonishing how not long ago these events took place.
Yeah, absolutely. So we get our sequence with Bernard Hill, who, sadly missed. I love this moment of Stauffenberg persuading the unnamed general to abandon this mission and to join up instead with German forces nearby so that they might simply have a better chance of survival.
Just survive.
And promising that he is going to take care of the water situation so that the actual, trail of documentation here will prove that it was the right and defensible choice to make. That's a really nice way of seeding the idea of how important the paperwork is. This is going to be so significant through the rest of the film that you have to have a paper trail that can validate your choices in the aftermath of whatever happens. And I really love how that's just hinted toward here. But then, of course, we get the attack. We have the Allied aircraft coming over, and we get the injury, and then we cut out hard to Kenneth Branagh.
Yes.
How do you feel about Branagh in this film? I know we talked a little about just loving the performance.
He's wonderful. Yeah.
He gives you everything that you want from this character as soon as we meet him?
Absolutely. I really was just kind of bummed that he left the movie for so long. Yeah. I was glad that when we got him back in the woods. And I was like, oh, that's right. He was here. He was so good.
So this is
he's wonderful.
Henning von Tresckow. We're here on the Eastern Front. We're in Russia with Hitler visiting the forward camp. And Tresckow has a bombed bottle of Cointreau.
Yeah.
So good.
So good.
And I think everyone involved.
Cool.
We do this without a lot of dialogue too, which is really lovely. And all of the stress, all of the tension, it's all right here. And I think works absolutely beautifully. And of course, this is where we introduce Albrecht too, who is already in on the plot. This is where we meet Bill Nye for the first time. We get the tense standoff with Tom Hollander too, who is just,
That was really smart. The two of them in that room debating on whether or like each trying to read each other, and Brandt offering the drink to Tresckow and his kind of, the one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back.
Do you know or do you not know?
Yeah.
Is this a game or is this not a game? Are you testing me or are you just where are we here?
Very stressful.
Really stressful and really beautifully done. For me, the shot in this entire sequence is where Tresckow is waiting by the phone and the two men are just smoking and the smoke is coiling in the air and it's just hanging there. And then the phone rings and I swear it's like 20th of a millisecond before Branagh grabs the phone and brings it up. It's so tense. It's so good. And most importantly, I think it communicates the stakes of this resistance really beautifully and really effortlessly. No one at any point says, if he realizes that bottle of Cointreau is bombed, we're going to be dragged up in front of the SS and executed.
Right. You don't have to do it.
Yeah. We just get to be in this space. And
that's a really good point.
Yeah. So again, I'm just going to keep saying this. So grown up. So lovely to see this film just be confident in its ability to speak to adults.
Yes.
This is the thing that I think Macquarie really excels at. weirdly, haven't talked a lot about McQuarrie. From here on out,
Yeah.
Cruise is going to work with McQuarrie all the time. He is going to be Cruise's guy. He's going to write a ton of the remaining 13 films in Tom Cruise's filmography, and then he's going to step up to direct. And the two are going to have probably the tightest working relationship of Tom Cruise's entire career, and arguably the most successful working relationship of Tom Cruise's entire career. And I think that one of the things that really distinguishes McQuarrie as a writer is this thought and care and confidence. He knows and can sense exactly how much emphasis to put on something so that it is communicated to the audience, but not overplayed, not overdealt. And I think that is, that's what distinguishes the later Mission Impossible movies, which are incredibly complex and labyrinthine.
Yeah.
But he manages to keep us oriented with the lightest necessary touch. He manages to just really walk that line very consistently as a writer. And I find that, enormously admirable. I think that McQuarrie is never going to be like anyone's favorite screenwriter, but he is just so competent that it's a different kind of excellence.
It is.
We cut from there to the hospital where von Stauffenberg is recuperating. His wife is talked through his injuries, and it's all valor and principle when Albrecht comes to recruit him. He sees that the conspiracy as it stands is naive about the political reality in Germany and resolves to find a strategy with a hope of success. But first he has to go to his home and his little flock of white night-gowned children. Here's a weird thing. I don't know how many children there were supposed to be in this scene.
Yeah, 4 or 5. It was a lot.
3 sometimes?
I don't know. It seemed like many.
Yeah,
a flurry of children.
There's just a group of children.
A group, yes.
One of the children plays Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, which...
that was maybe a little...
I think it's a little misjudged because, yes, obviously the association with the Valkyrie, right? That's okay. We're planting this idea in a way that is communicated to the audience, which is pretty good. But Wagner is most famous now for being Hitler's favorite composer, which makes me think that this is a plant. It makes me think that it is a plot. And then we have the little girl saluting in the little Wehrmacht hat that she's wearing. She's a spy. He is being set up. She's a spy, clearly. We take shelter in the basement to wait out the air raid, and the idea takes hold.
That was also very stressful.
Yes.
Yeah, especially...
Feels very familiar to under very different circumstances, but it's very familiar to us here in Oklahoma that when the siren rings, you run to the lowest point of your house and take shelter. Yeah,
absolutely. And wait for the booms and the bangs.
It is pretty scary. What did you think of the rotating camera above the record player to normalize the rotation of the label on the record so that we could see that it is, in fact, the Ride of the Valkyries by Wagner?
Which is,
maybe a moment where the film is less confident in its audience's capability.
We had just said that, he never spoon feeds you, and now here we are. But so it's a nice camera trick, and I did enjoy it. It took a hair too long, I felt, and we held it a little bit too long. But other than that.
So this is the heart of the idea that it isn't enough to kill Hitler because the SS will just step in to fill the void. Instead, we have to remove the SS. And to do that, we have to stage a fake coup on top of our real coup so that we can
really smart.
Seize control of the government under Operation Valkyrie. Yeah. They go to the head of the reserve army. They go to Fromm, the very nervy Tom Wilkinson.
Yes.
He navigates the politics in this scene and refuses the offer, though still offers this like tacit approval.
Right.
There's still this idea that, well, okay, I'm not going to...
If it works,
I'm not going to help you.
I'll be on your side.
But I'm not going to stop you. And if I don't stop you, I deserve a reward on the other side, right?
Right.
Stauffenberg then goes to talk to Feldgiebel, to Eddie Izzard, who is just so good in this opening scene. I think really works. Feldgiebel is the signals officer who works at the Wolf's Lair bunker and who can cut off contact between the bunker and the outside world, giving this plan, this plot, the necessary time to complete its goals. Stauffenberg is promoted to Chief of Staff for the Reserve Army and takes this fresh-faced young adjutant to the Berghof. I want to talk about that one scene where the adjutant is brought in and how immediately Tom Cruise just lays out the plan. Anyway, I'm engaged in mass treason. How do you feel? You want to get shot with me?
And the kid's just like, I'm in anything you want.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Comes highly recommended, the guy had said, right?
Really good.
I thought that was really strong.
Then we have this sequence with, going to the Berghof, going to Hitler's residence and the presentation of the amended Operation Valkyrie order for Hitler's signature, really
also
leaning
stressful.
on this idea that the paper trail is necessary. I wish the performance were a little better. I just wish the performance were a
Hitler
little
guy.
I wish it were just a little less of an impression and a little more of an authentic, internally motivated performance.
Yeah,
because it does feel a little cartoonish, unfortunately.
Cartoonish is a good way to put it, and I agree.
We get to the lecture about Wagner, which is just maybe the film kind of doubling down on this core idea. Very, very pleased with itself in this moment. We get the briefing about contemporary explosives technology, which is brilliant. This is the introduction of your favorite character, which includes the genuinely fantastic phrase, British time pencil.
British time pencil.
Doesn't that feel good in the mouth?
Feels good.
Isn't that like a cellar door?
I like it.
This is mellifluity. This is
yes, so good.
British time pencil. Very pleasant to say. Then we launch the assassination attempt, and though we're looking at the clock, watching the film and realizing that this is not, in fact, where the film is going to end up. For you, as we move through this film, is there any tension in the idea that we might assassinate Hitler? Is there any kind of moment when the power of the film suspends your disbelief such that you wonder if they're going to succeed? Is there any ambiguity there for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an excellent student of history, but I know how this turns out.
Indeed. Particularly in 2008, because we have not yet been spanked publicly for believing that history will play out the way that history plays out in Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, a film which actually does successfully kill Hitler.
That's
at the
true.
end
I've never
of its
seen
arc.
that, though.
Yeah.
You think I should?
Nope.
Yeah, I don't really like Quentin Tarantino. I think that's come up on this podcast before.
I specifically think that is a film that you would dislike. Although we're just talking about Brad Pitt, and Pitt's actually very good in Inglourious Basterds.
And I do love Brad Pitt. Yeah.
That's a good mode for him, too, there in the following year.
Sure. Yeah.
Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators arrive at the heavily fortified Wolf's Lair. They go into the briefing room. The bomb is placed beneath the table. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, is not present. This is an interesting question. Did you know who Heinrich Himmler was historically? Did you recognize that name and know his position? Because they don't at any point lay that out in the film.
They don't tell you, and they don't have him in the room.
He is actually in the room when we go to the Berghof.
He is
one of the guys there. No, this is before. He is one of the guys in the room at that point, but I don't think gets any lines. And if you didn't know, then you wouldn't know.
Sure.
But certainly at this point, his absence is what's important. But I think that the film doesn't necessarily communicate why it is so important that we also kill the head of the SS at this point. So we get this back and forth, this incredibly tense, daisy chain of phone conversations coming all the way down to Terrence Stamp, which is just so strong. The tension, what you can do in a film, just with like 4 locked off shots of very intense men holding phones.
Yeah.
Extremely good.
Just sweating a little bit.
Yeah.
It's such a suspenseful movie, even though, and that's, there's really something to that. To know how it's going to end and to still feel suspense all the way through just because you're with these characters, knowing that it's not going to work.
This is Hitchcock's definition of suspense, is literally a bomb under the table. Wondering when it's going to go off. So I like how this is balanced here. I like that he does not get the approval to go forward. I like that moment, even when the briefcase goes missing just for a second.
Yep.
And Wilkinson is being, spectral and just present in a weird way. That whole thing, I think, works very nicely.
The poor kid's face again. When
Exactly.
he looks over at him, he doesn't have the case.
A lot of face. That kid is giving a lot of
I think it's
face.
great, though.
This is the midpoint of the film, believe it or not, because this is the moment where the first try has failed. The stakes are higher than ever. Girdler and Beck face off over the Resistance's faith in Stauffenberg, but Girdler has been targeted by Himmler and has to leave Germany at this point. Another actor that I kind of wish could have stuck around for the rest of the running time, but again, we must bow to the constraints of history here. 5 days later, July 20th, the second attempt begins. For the most petty of reasons, this is so beautifully orchestrated. I think just trying to prime these explosive devices while pretending to change clothes because of the blood on the neck of his shirt. The guy just really trying to do his best, just trying to make sure that everyone is where they need to be, insistently opening the door, such that only one explosive device is primed. This is apparently historically accurate. The second device would have killed Hitler if it had, been arrayed properly. We then get the fact that the briefing has been transitioned to
moved because it's too hot.
Yes, open air conference space with windows. Having already established earlier that it's the fact that the briefing takes place in the heart of the concrete bunker that guarantees that everyone would have died if the bomb had in fact gone off. We get the brilliant moment with Brent realizing that the case has been knocked over, setting it upright, and moving it closer to Hitler. So good. Yeah. Everything that's happening here, I think, is just
really smart.
Yeah, just really great. Super tense, well arrayed. And then we get, surprisingly almost, the explosion. I found the explosion to be really jarring and physically effective in the frame of the film. Stauffenberg flees. Feldgiebel tells Albrecht that Hitler is something. Alive? Dead? Who knows? And then severs communications. And Albrecht hesitates. And
Why
is
did
the
he
moment.
not say dead?
I don't know
Do you
what
think
we're
because
supposed to
he
interpret
didn't
there.
know?
I don't know if he didn't know. I don't know if he wasn't sure about the success of the plot. I don't know if
Right.
he was
Because he
in
knew
that
had
moment
been moved at
tempted to
least.
be a faithful officer of the Reich, right? I don't know like where
I
his
don't know.
political loyalties
Yeah.
were lying. Certainly he needed more pressure applied to him than any of the other conspirators, I guess.
Mhm.
And also, he's really being hung out to dry in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's complicated to parse, and I'm not sure. Or
Mm.
maybe just the communications went down before he could say the final word.
Yeah.
But the ambiguity is, I think, really interesting, and then doesn't completely resolve properly for me. It doesn't really, and again, this is because we're bound by what actually happened
Right.
during this period of time. But the way that we're establishing this ambiguity, right? If you're writing fiction, you can begin to leverage, well, the idea of Hitler versus the actual person of Hitler,
Yeah.
and which is more powerful and which is more potent. And the fact that you are leveraging, the Operation Valkyrie orders to preserve Hitler's Reich. It's just, there's so much complexity there. And unfortunately, the mundanity of history just kind of drains some of that tension out. So instead, we start to lean on this idea that failure is fated, that this is going to come apart. But I don't think that the film completely seals that deal either. I think that Albrecht's hesitation, his refusal to give the order, and this 3-hour window,
3 hours,
that is the turning point in the film. That is the moment of crisis that dooms everyone. Like, at least narratively speaking. In real life, we can speculate about what may or may not have happened.
Sure.
But as far as the film is concerned, everything up to that point has worked.
Right.
And it is that moment of indecision, that moment of cowardice, that dooms their plan to take back Germany. And that isn't emphasized enough, I think, by the script, because we still want to hand agency and power and leadership to Stauffenberg. So we have to wait for him to come back to Berlin and to go through the motions of this and to set up his new command and to issue all of these orders. We should talk too. We didn't get a chance to talk about Thomas Kretschmann playing Otto Ernst Remmer, the commander of the Guard Battalion, I guess, the commander of the Reserve Army.
Yeah.
Did you recognize him from
He
Marvel?
familiar.
He is von Strucker in Age of Ultron.
No.
Yeah. He's a mid-tier Marvel villain for a bit. He's fantastic in this film.
I thought he was great.
He's so good. The second time the order to get ready comes in, and he looks at the guy and says, in ancient Greek days, you would have been killed for this message. Luckily, we're more evolved. It's so good.
It is good. It's really
so
smart.
light on his feet.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
Yeah. So this is what happens. We just go through the process now of trying to seize control, of getting the government district, of going to the SS headquarters, of arresting all of these officers, and then ultimately these final decisions.
Like falling apart
unfolding.
as it's happening. That was so hard to watch.
I love every time we cut back to Stauffenberg, the room is more empty.
Yes.
Until right at the end, he just tells his secretary to go.
And she's crying.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
It's beautiful.
And
it
then
really
we really shift gears, I think, into something much more melodramatic. The moment that Stauffenberg takes his pistol from his desk drawer and tells Terrence Stamp that it's time to go.
Yeah.
We really, I think, do move into a more operatic mode, and all of the emotions are more heightened.
Yes.
The music
That's
gets
the
much
part
bigger.
That feels like an Academy Award pitch. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Oh, because the Academy loves nothing more than like doomed heroism.
Yes.
Oh, you're a man of principle and honor, and then you don't succeed and you die trying. Like, the Academy will reward that with statuary very often. It plays for you. It works for you cinematically here as we see the final moments of these men. The final betrayal of Tom Wilkinson.
I think that ultimately, yes, it does. It surprised me because it is such a change in tone from the rest of the film. But I kind of wanted that. Like, I was at that point just a little bit let down by the fact that it just played more like prestige, drama, suspense than it did like a real human heroism story, which is what I wanted. So I was glad to get there if it was a bit of a sharp left turn.
Yeah, I see that. What do you think of the individual moments of death here at the end of the film? I guess we start with Terrence Stamp asking for the pistol for personal reasons. Oh my God, what a moment of cinema. That is, it's so powerful. He really nails it throughout this film. I think he's just a terrific performance. And then, of course, that moment where he looks to Stauffenberg and says, I'm thinking of earlier times, and then pulls the trigger. What a man of principle
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
It's really wonderful, I think.
Yes, I agree. That was the most poignant one, definitely.
The cutout to Trescow in the forest with the grenade is
Jesus.
upsetting.
Yeah, very
profoundly upsetting.
Yeah.
But, and again, just Branagh bringing it.
Mhm.
Like, I would almost... We talked about how ridiculously stacked the supporting cast category is at the Oscars this year. I would almost be tempted to put Branagh's name on a long list, at least.
Yeah.
Is he the standout for you in the supporting cast? Is he giving the most, do you think, as useless as it is to try and rank actors? Not to be old George C. Scott about it, but...
Yeah. He's probably giving the most, yes. But I think I like Nighy, and I like, the guy playing Mertz, I really like, too. Yeah.
That's a really lovely performance.
It really is. And I don't recognize him particularly.
That is Christian Berkel. He is a well-regarded German actor who has a habit of appearing in American films about Hitler. He appears in Downfall in 2004, Valkyrie in 2008, Inglourious Basterds in 2009.
Oh, okay.
So he does like the whole, panoply of Hollywood movies about Hitler in the early 2000s.
Okay.
Again, he is fantastic.
He's really good.
It is such a knockout performance. And his ability to communicate, not even without dialogue, but without moving. His face is so still.
Yeah.
And just really fantastic.
Yes.
So fantastic, in fact, that you completely trust Stauffenberg's decision to just bring him into the conspiracy at a very senior level.
That's
really
true.
Having just met the
and
guy.
that guy, he just points to him.
He said, British timing pencil. Good enough for me. Fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. It's true.
I think for me, Branagh works the best because he really is in control of that 5-minute chunk right at the beginning of the film. He really sets the stage for the conspiracy, and I think does so much with so little.
That's true.
Does
He
so
gets
much
the
just
momentum
in his
going.
performance. Yeah, it's really lovely. And then the final moment of Hefton stepping in front of Stauffenberg and being shot. And this is, again, there are some interesting historical discrepancies in this description. It is a story that he did exactly this, right? That he stepped in front and that the entire firing squad opened fire and just killed Hefton and then had to reload so that they could kill Stauffenberg. But when they went to shoot that sequence in the film, it became clear to them that that is impossible. It couldn't have happened because the bullets would have pierced Hefton and killed Stauffenberg anyway. So the common consensus, like the commonly held story of what happened during that final moment of execution is apparently untrue. So they make the change. They make the change to accommodate that in the span of the film, which I think is an interesting choice.
It is,
kind of leaning on the reality of it and making enough of a concession that it works narratively and historically, which I think is, really strong.
Wow.
And then we get our title cards telling us what happened to everyone involved. It's a powerful piece of storytelling and a really important story too, right? This is maybe the first time in Cruise's career that he has been attached to a narrative of actual historical significance, right? Because Born on the 4th of July, which is maybe the other swing at this, is so swamped by the Oliver Stone of it all. It is so... The historicality of that film is so swamped by the melodrama of that film, right? It is so much more a film than it is a story about something that really happened. I think that this really stands apart. This is the other way of tackling historical record and important stories that need to be told. And for that, if nothing else, for telling the world and reintroducing this story to an entirely new generation of filmgoers, I think that this film ought to be applauded.
Yeah.
Is there anything else we want to say about the film before we put it on the big list?
Just that, I did enjoy it a lot. Like I'm glad that I watched it and I think it's good.
All right.
Yeah.
It works for me. Where does it go on the list then? A natural segue presents itself. Where do we put it on the big list of currently 30 Tom Cruise films?
Man, this goes towards the top. I think this is in the top 10.
Top 10 is really interesting. Yes. Number 10 on the list right now is Mission Impossible 3 from 2006. Number 9
I can't
is
even remember what happens in
Interview
that one.
with the Vampire. Number 8 is Rain Man. Number 7 is The Firm.
Yeah, I'm feeling around there, around The Firm, around Rain Man.
I think that Rain Man and The Firm are the points of comparison for Valkyrie because they are both so goddamn competent. They are just adequate films in every way, right? I think that Rain Man maybe takes a bigger swing. It's maybe trying a little more and maybe falters a little more, but these are tiny degrees of incarnation here, I think. So, and then past that, we're at Magnolia and we're at A Few Good Men and we're at The Last Samurai. Films which are perhaps in some ways less competent, but their highs so completely outbalance the lows.
Exactly, just much more sweeping.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so we're in a kind of
we're
in a mode of genius by the time that we start getting up toward Magnolia there. So I think, The Firm, Rain Man, Interview with the Vampire, maybe we can put it somewhere around here?
Yeah, I might put it between The Firm and Rain Man.
Right. I think that is a defensible position. I might argue for it going beneath Rain Man, above Interview with the Vampire because of iconicity. Because this is a completely forgotten film.
Yeah.
Like, as much as any other film that we've discussed in this series, nobody remembers Valkyrie.
Nobody remembers it.
And it didn't even have as much impact as it should have had when it was released. It's not just a film that was lauded in its day and has now been forgotten. It was almost irrelevant from the minute that it hit cinemas.
Yeah.
And I find that, and also tangled up in the Bryan Singer of it all. Also
absolutely. That's a good point.
I'm not completely sure about that. Though, again, I will note, much to its credit, that this film has almost no directorial fingerprint. That this really feels like
so true.
A production team working on this movie. So I would maybe suggest that would be the new number 9 right under Rain Man.
I like that. I think that sounds right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think you're right.
Then a late era gem, I think, for us personally. I don't think I'm maybe ever going to watch that. You know what? I might. Some Sunday afternoon, 5 years from now, I might just sit down and put on Valkyrie.
I could see that.
Just to enjoy the character actorness of it all. I think that there's a lot
you love
to
character
like.
actors. And there are so many great performances in this. There really are. That's
going to do it for this week's episode of The Last Star in Hollywood. Everything that we do here at The Last Star in Hollywood, everything that we do here at Next Word is possible thanks to you guys who head on over to the Patreon page, patreon.com/nextword, and pledge your support so that we can do more of this. You can head over there right now and you can find a pilot episode for an upcoming show that we're about to do. That's really exciting. That was a ton of fun. If you want to hear what's coming next from Next Word, patreon.com/nextword, where you can also hear my thoughts on Mike Newell's 2012 adaptation of Great Expectations.
That's right.
And any minute now, Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World.
Yes.
We've got our Last Star in Hollywood bonus episode for this month.
I love that movie.
Going up very soon. So that's going to be... And then next week I'm talking about the Quaron 1997, Great Expectations 2,
also
with
cool.
Ethan Hawke. So that's going to be a fun discussion as well. So much over there on the Patreon page. Elizabeth, would you like to thank our superstar level patrons?
Absolutely. Thanks to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, Self on a Shelf, Jolene Stark, Chris Dawns, and the Lady Gordon.
Thank you guys so much. We wouldn't be able to do this without your generous support. We've got 13 movies left here in our podcast project, and the next one is, hopefully, a stupid kind of fun. 18 months after the release of Valkyrie, Cruz is back. He's trying to rehabilitate his public image with a high-energy action comedy, reuniting him, of course, with his Vanilla Sky co-star, Cameron Diaz, as well as with Peter Skarsgård, a very early Gal Gadot appearance in this film. Maggie Grace, that's Shannon from Lost, you guys. She's in this film 100%. And of course, Mark Blucas. Mark Blucas, you're looking at me blankly. Oh, Riley Finn, Buffy's boyfriend from season 4.
Okay.
That's what we're looking forward to next week here on The Last Star in Hollywood as we look at the 2010 action thriller drama comedy something Night and Day. That's going to be fun. That might be an evening record. We might have margaritas for that one.
Ooh,
margaritas seems like the right energy for Night and Day. I'm going to tell you that right now.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
That's going to do it for this week, though, guys. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back with you again soon. Until then, take care.
We'll see you next time.